Mad Hoolagoo 67 writes to me and asks me, Dan, what kind of people aggravate you the most? I'm actually doing this is the second straight one I'm talking about aggravation, but it's apropos because only a few days ago I've been training at a new job for the last few months, and one of the fellows who was training me invited a friend of his to come over overnight at work. And so I got into a talk with this person. He's a 27-year-old kid who was graduated from the University of Texas. And he claimed to be an English major, but he's one of these like phonies that was an English major, but an English major, he said, because it was the easiest way to get a liberal arts degree. And this is what usually happens. That sneeze was from my cat Kiwi. Anyway, so he came by, he stopped by, he's talking with me and this other fellow who's training me, and he's now a computer programmer, and he claims to be an artist because he designed the glove. So I asked him what he knew about English literature. He didn't know anything about poetry, he didn't know anything about writing, he didn't know anything about art. But as usual, he pretended he did. And every time I sort of frustrated his ambitions, he would be one of these people who go, no, 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 no. He's one of these people who, when you confront them with their limited mindset, they go, no, no, no. So anyway, he either did that or he uttered an endless string of cliches. I remember he said that he told me right up front in our 20-minute conversation or so before I came off break, he said he was a free thinker. Yet everything that he uttered was an utter cliche. Not only was it a cliche, but it was a cliche that he had learned from the MFA program that he had been in. And he was so indoctrinated, so zombified by this, that he had no idea that he had no center, that there was no person within him. He thought, he stated things that had been stated 1,000 times before. He was truly a cipher. He would say things like, all art is subjective, which I've debunked many times. He would tell me everything is art. He'd hold up his cell phone and tell me that's art, because I said art is communication at its highest level. Well, a cell phone communicates. I had to explain to him, no, a cell phone doesn't communicate. Two people communicate. The cell phone is only the thing that helps people communicate, and it's communication at its lowest level, just plain talk, one-to-one. But because the cell phone is beautiful and because he could take his finger and flick through apps, he said, to me, that's art. What is art? Everything is subjective. And, I, of course, debunked that, and this frustrated him even more. I had to explain to him that the phone is not art, just like a transistor is not a radio. A thing can be a part of something, but that doesn't make the small part that major thing. Just as you can have a thing like metaphor. Metaphor itself is not art. It's a technique that art can use, but metaphor can be used outside of art in everyday speech. Of course, he didn't get these types of things. And as I said, he would just go, no, no, no. He told me, for example, his big hero was Steve Jobs. Now, everyone with a brain knows that Steve Jobs was not an artist. He was barely an inventor. He was just a businessman. But according to this kid, he was an artist of money, and that any scientist was just as important as any artist. Well, I told him that's ridiculous, because if you removed Herman Melville, for example, there's no Moby Dick. He'd say, well, you don't know about that. And I said, yes, I do, because of the 215,000 words, they'd have to be strung along in the same place, in the same proper place, the same way, and be written in the same time. And if Melville didn't exist, it's not going to be done. But he wouldn't admit that. But the scientist, I could say, well, you can look at Charles Darwin. There was Alfred Russel Wallace for him. There was Nikola Tesla if there was no Marconi, and so on and so forth. Yet he was trying to tell me that if there was no Albert Einstein, the world today would be totally different. I said, of course not. It only means it would be just a few years later that the same people who were working in Einstein's field would have come up with the same thing. If you removed Newton, I told them, you still have calculus. Leibniz was working on calculus. Other people were working on similar things at the same time. It's just that Newton got there first. And by first, it could mean that it was just a few years, but you'd still have calculus. Then, of course, he got to really silly stuff, talking about Michael Jordan being a poet with a basketball. Again, I tried to explain that that's just metaphor. No one is saying he's really an artist. I said that's why when people talk about people or a painter being a poet with a canvas, they're not saying he's really a poet. They're just using a metaphor because poetry is acknowledged as the highest of the art forms. What happened was, so about 20 minutes we're talking like this, he finally got a phone call on his work of art, and I had to go back. But it took me, I tried so hard not to laugh at this kid, but it was so sad because he was, nominally functionally intelligent. He had no creationary intelligence. He had no visionary intelligence. Everything he said was a canned answer. There was no there. It was like looking into a zombie or a robot. He thought he had come up with this crap on his own, but he had sucked it all in from an MFA program. Anyway, the bullshit when people say, everyone's an artist, I've always said that just cheapens what art is. To call everything art cheapens it. I said, this is why abstract expressionism failed. Of course, he thought architecture was art. And again, I had to explain, amongst the other dozen cliches or so he spouted, that architecture is not art. There can be some art in the design of architecture, but a building itself is not a piece of art. It serves a useful purpose. That the power from art, from great art, comes from the very fact of its non-utilitarianism. We can live without art perfectly fine. Most people do. But again, this is a great artist myself talking to an MFA zombie, someone who, in a sense, is worse off than the person who has no interest in the art, because this kid was so delusional that he had these thoughts and ideas that just couldn't be sustained. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that aggravates me, and I just wanted to share it because my guess is all of you have run into someone like this zombie that visited me a few nights ago. God, why?